Archaeologists working in Sardis, Turkey, in 1968 pulled back a layer of scorched earth and found a small stone workshop buried beneath centuries of rubble. Inside, they found ceramic vessels, salt residue, and traces of heated gold. The walls were stained from extreme heat. The floor held remnants of a cementation process so precise it required a working knowledge of chemistry that most people assume did not exist in 560 BCE. This was not a temple. It was not a palace. It was a factory. And what it produced changed the entire architecture of human civilization. The room belonged to King Croesus of Lydia. You know his name. Rich as Croesus is still a phrase people use today without knowing where it comes from. But the phrase is not really about wealth. It is about something far more consequential. Croesus did not simply accumulate gold. He standardized it. He purified it. He stamped it with a symbol of royal authority and released it into the world as a unit of account that anyone, anywhere, could trust without knowing the king personally. That is not wealth creation. That is the engineering of a trust system. And the trust system Croesus built in that scorched workshop in western Turkey is the same trust system backing the dollar in your pocket right now. Oil did not make money powerful. Metal did not make money powerful. The state's ability to define, control, and enforce what counts as money made it powerful. Croesus understood this in 560 BCE. Every central banker on earth understands it today. The history books taught you that money evolved naturally from barter. A farmer traded grain for shoes. A merchant wanted something more portable. Someone picked up a shiny metal and everyone agreed it had value. Clean, logical, intuitive, it is also almost entirely wrong. Money was not discovered. It was engineered. By states, by temples, by military commanders who needed to pay soldiers across distances that made grain impractical. The transition from commodity exchange to metal-based monetary systems was a deliberate political act, driven by institutional power and the need to concentrate economic control in the hands of those who could define what the medium of exchange actually was. The room archaeologists found in Sardis was not the birthplace of wealth, it was the birthplace of monetary sovereignty. Welcome to Noob Historian. Behind every headline in your history book, there's a ledger they kept hidden. We open it. And this ledger goes back 5,000 years. It runs through Mesopotamian temple economies, Lydian gold workshops, Athenian silver mines, Spanish treasure fleets, and a single television broadcast on August 15, 1971, when an American president told the world that the 5,000-year relationship between metal and money was over. You live in the world that decision built. Understanding how we got there starts in a room under the dirt in ancient Turkey, and it starts much earlier than that, in a civilization that figured out the core problem of monetary systems before metal coins even existed. Open any introductory economics textbook and you will find the same story. Before money, there was barter. Two people met, they had things the other wanted, they traded, but barter had a problem called the double coincidence of wants. The farmer needed shoes, but the shoemaker did not want grain that week, so they needed a neutral medium. Something portable, something everyone valued. Metal fit the requirements, coins emerged, money was born. Adam Smith told this story in The Wealth of Nations in 1776. Economists repeated it for 200 years. It became the foundational myth of monetary theory. The cuneiform tablets at the British Museum destroyed it. Archaeologists and linguists working with the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative have cataloged and digitized thousands of clay tablets from Mesopotamia dating back to 3000 BCE. These tablets are not myths or religious texts. They are receipts, they are loan agreements, they are wage records, they are tax ledgers, and they describe a monetary system of extraordinary sophistication that predates the earliest metal coins by more than 2,000 years. The unit of account in these tablets is the shekel, not a coin, a weight. Specifically, the weight of a standardized quantity of silver, approximately 8.3 grams, defined and enforced by the temple institutions of ancient Sumer. You did not need to carry silver to participate in this system. You needed to know the silver value of what you were exchanging. The temple kept the accounts. Economist Marvin Powell, in his landmark 1978 paper, published in Wirtschaft und Gesellschaft im alten Vorderasien, traced this system to the temple complex of Ur, one of the dominant institutional powers of ancient Mesopotamia. The temple was not a religious charity. It was an economic engine. It controlled land. It employed workers. It stored grain. It issued credit. And it denominated all of this activity in silver weight shekels, even when no silver physically changed hands. This is the detail the textbooks skip. The earliest monetary system in human recorded history was not a commodity exchange system. It was a credit system. Silver was the unit of measurement, not the medium of physical transfer. The temple was the ledger. Trust in the temple was the backing. David Graeber, in debt. The first 5,000 years pushed this argument further and sparked significant academic debate. Graeber's core claim, drawn from the primary temple records and anthropological field research, was that credit preceded commodity money historically across multiple civilizations, not just Mesopotamia. His interpretive conclusions remain contested among economists and historians, but the primary evidence he draws from, the actual tablet records and tribute lists, is not contested. Those documents exist. They say what he says they say. What this means for the story of money is significant. The barter myth taught you that money emerged from the bottom up. People in markets invented it out of practical necessity. The tablet record tells a different story. Money emerged from the top down. Institutional powers, temples, palace economies, military administrators created monetary systems to solve their own accounting, taxation, and payroll problems. The ordinary person did not invent money. The ordinary person was subjected to money as a tool of institutional control and resource extraction. The Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on a diorite stele now in the Louvre in Paris, makes this explicit. Issued by the Babylonian king around 1754 BCE, the code contains detailed monetary law. It specifies that debts are to be repaid in silver or grain at defined exchange rates. It mandates interest rates for loans, the world's first documented interest rate regulations. It establishes penalties for merchants who manipulate weights. It is, in effect, the world's oldest monetary regulatory framework. Hammurabi did not codify these laws because markets had naturally arrived at silver as a medium, and he was simply writing down what everyone already did. He codified them because the state needed to standardize and control the monetary system, to extract taxes, pay administrators, and fund military operations. The law was the monetary system. The state was the guarantor. Remove the state, and the silver weight meant nothing. This is the first principle of monetary history. Money is not a natural phenomenon. It is a political technology. Its value derives not from the material it is made of, but from the institutional authority that defines and enforces its use. You carry this principle in your wallet today. The paper dollar has no commodity value. It is worth what the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government say it is worth, backed by the full institutional weight of the most powerful state in human history. The mechanics are different. The underlying logic is identical to a Sumerian temple clerk recording a silver shekel debt on a clay tablet in 2500 BCE. The system is 5,000 years old. Only the material changed. The Sardis excavation team, operating under the joint Harvard-Cornell archaeological program beginning in 1958, spent decades carefully working through the ruins of what had been the Lydian capital in western Anatolia. The site had been destroyed, rebuilt, conquered by Persians, absorbed by Alexander's empire, and eventually buried by time. But the gold workshop survived. Archaeological analysis, confirmed in publications in the American Journal of Archaeology and summarized widely, including in a New York Times report from August 2000, identified the specific technical process operating in that workshop. It was called cementation. You take electrum, the naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver found in Lydian riverbeds, pack it in ceramic vessels with salt and brick dust, and heat it to extreme temperatures. The salt reacts with the silver content of the electrum, separating it out and leaving behind a nugget of substantially purer gold. This is not accidental metallurgy. This is applied chemistry. Someone understood what was happening at a molecular level, even without the vocabulary to describe it that way. The result was the ability to produce gold of controlled and predictable purity, and to do the same for silver separately. Numismatist John Kroll, whose research forms part of the Sardis Expedition Archive, documented the sequence that followed. Before Croesus, Lydia used unstandardized lumps of electrum as exchange medium. The problem was obvious. Without knowing the exact gold-to-silver ratio in a given lump, neither party in a transaction knew what they were actually exchanging. Merchants carried scales and tested metal constantly. Trust was transactional and exhausting. Every exchange required negotiation about the value of the medium of exchange itself before you even got to the value of what was being traded. Croesus solved this with two decisions that together constitute one of the most consequential acts of economic engineering in human history. First, he used the cementation process to produce coins of defined and verifiable purity, pure gold on one denomination, pure silver on another. The Croecides, as numismatists now call them, were the first bimetallic coinage of standardized purity in recorded history. Second, he stamped them. The stamp is what made the coin. The stamp was not decoration. It was a sovereign guarantee. It said, "The authority of Lydia's king backs the purity of this metal. You do not need to test it. You do not need to negotiate it. You accept the stamp, and you accept the value it represents." This was the Lydian breakthrough. Metal had existed for thousands of years before Croesus. Silver shekels had circulated in Mesopotamia for millennia. But Croesus fused three things that had never been fused before at this level of precision: standardized purity, standardized weight, and sovereign authority encoded in a physical symbol. The coin was not a piece of metal. The coin was a portable piece of the state. Once you understand that, the adoption of Lydian-style coinage across the ancient Mediterranean makes complete sense. Greek city-states adopted coinage not because metal was new to them. They adopted it because the Lydian model solved the trust problem at scale. You could take a Lydian coin to a market in Athens, in Carthage, in Persepolis, and the stamp communicated authority that crossed linguistic and cultural borders. You did not need to speak Lydian, you needed to recognize the lion. Croesus was defeated and captured by the Persian king Cyrus the Great in 546 BCE. The Persians absorbed Lydia and immediately began minting their own coins in the Lydian tradition, the famous gold derrick bearing the image of the Persian king. The conquerors understood immediately what Croesus had built. They did not dismantle the monetary system, they took it over. Because controlling the mint meant controlling the economy, and controlling the economy meant controlling everything downstream of it. The infrastructure Croesus engineered in that stone workshop became a template that spread across the ancient world within a century. And nowhere did it produce more dramatic political consequences than in the silver mines of Athens. In 483 BCE, Athenian miners working the Laurian silver deposits in southern Attica broke into a new ore body of extraordinary richness. The discovery generated a surplus of silver so large that the Athenian assembly faced a genuine policy decision about what to do with it. The politician Themistocles proposed building warships. The assembly agreed. Athens built 200 triremes, the most advanced warships in the ancient Mediterranean. 7 years later, in 480 BCE, those ships met the Persian fleet of Xerxes at the Battle of Salamis and destroyed it. The Persian invasion of Greece collapsed. Western civilization, as we trace it through Greek philosophy, democracy, and political theory, survived. A geochemical isotope study published in 2021 through PubMed Central applied modern scientific analysis to ancient silver coins from the 6th through 1st centuries BCE. The analysis traced the silver in those coins to specific mine sources with the precision of a fingerprint. Laurian silver shows up in Athenian coins, in trade networks across the Aegean, and in payment records for the exact period when Athens built its fleet and rose to Mediterranean dominance. The connection is not theoretical, it is chemically traceable. The silver atoms in the ground at Laurian became the coins in Themistocles' treasury that became the hulls of the fleet that stopped Persia. Money was not a tool of commerce in this moment. Money was a weapon of geopolitical survival. Athens understood this more clearly than perhaps any other ancient state, and the Athenian owl tetradrachm, the silver coin bearing Athena's image and the owl of wisdom, became the dominant reserve currency of the ancient Mediterranean world for nearly 2 centuries. Other city-states accepted Athenian owls not because of friendship with Athens, but because the quality was consistent, the weight was reliable, and the silver content was backed by the productivity of the Laurian mines. Reserve currency status is not a modern invention. It is a structural outcome of monetary trust at scale. Athens built it on silver. The British built it on sterling backed by gold reserves. America built it on the dollar backed by the Bretton Woods gold peg. The mechanism is the same across 2,500 years. The nation that controls the most trusted monetary unit controls the terms of trade for everyone who uses it. But the Laurian mines also reveal the darker architecture underneath the Athenian monetary system. The mines were worked by slaves. Estimates by ancient historians and modern archaeologists place the enslaved labor force at Laurian between 10,000 and 30,000 people at peak operation. These individuals received no wages. They produced the silver that funded Athenian democracy. The political freedom of Athenian citizens rested structurally on the extraction of enslaved labor in the silver mines below the city's feet. The monetary system and the political system were inseparable. The bottleneck was the mine. Control the mine and you controlled the treasury. Control the treasury and you controlled the fleet. Control the fleet and you controlled the sea lanes. Control the sea lanes and Athens was the gatekeeper of Mediterranean trade for 150 years. This is what monetary history actually looks like when you follow the metal instead of the narrative. It is not a story of enlightened economic progress. It is a story of extraction, concentration, and the engineering of structural advantages that compound over time. The Roman Empire followed the same logic. Roman monetary power rested on the silver denarius, and Roman expansion was, in significant part, a systematic campaign to control the silver and gold mines of conquered territories. Spain under Roman rule became the primary silver-producing region of the ancient world, a fact that would echo with extraordinary consequences. 1,500 years later, when Spanish ships returned from the Americas, carrying metal in quantities that broke the entire European monetary order. In 1545, Spanish prospectors discovered the silver mountain of Potosi in what is now Bolivia. The deposit was so large that contemporaries struggled to describe it. Within a decade, Spanish ships were carrying silver across the Atlantic in quantities that had no historical precedent. Between 1500 and 1650, approximately 16,000 metric tons of silver and 180 metric tons of gold arrived in Europe from the Americas, according to historians working from Spanish treasury records and shipping manifests. The European monetary system had never experienced anything like it. For most of the medieval period, Europe operated under chronic metal scarcity. There was not enough silver and gold in circulation to sustain growing trade networks. This scarcity gave metal its monetary stability. You could not simply print more gold. Supply was a physical constraint that acted as a natural brake on monetary expansion. The American silver floods removed that brake. Across Europe, prices began rising in the early 16th century and continued rising for over a century. By 1650, the general price level across most of Europe had increased by approximately 400% compared to 1500. Historian Earl Hamilton documented this in his foundational 1934 work, American Treasure and the Price Revolution in Spain, using Spanish price records covering 2 centuries. Subsequent historians have debated the precise causal mechanisms, but the correlation between American silver inflows and sustained European inflation is one of the most thoroughly documented relationships in economic history. The distributional consequences were severe and specific. Landlords who held long-term rental agreements in fixed nominal amounts watched their real income collapse as prices rose. Merchants, who could quickly reprice their goods, benefited. Wage earners fell behind as food prices outpaced wage growth. The price revolution did not simply raise the overall price level, it redistributed wealth between social classes in ways that accelerated the breakdown of the feudal economic order and contributed to the social instability that characterized 16th and 17th century Europe. This is not an abstract historical footnote. It is the first documented case of what modern economists call demand-pull inflation, driven by money supply expansion. The Spanish crown controlled the largest monetary supply expansion in European history up to that point, but they did not control the inflationary consequences. The metal flowed from the Americas to Spain to pay for goods Spain could not produce domestically. From Spain it flowed to the Ottoman Empire, to China, to India, as payment for the manufactured goods and spices Europe wanted. The Spanish briefly held the metal. The metal did not hold Spain. Spain's economic dominance proved short-lived precisely because metal alone does not produce economic power. What produces economic power is productive capacity, institutional infrastructure, and the ability to add value to raw materials. Spain extracted metal. England, the Netherlands, and France built manufactures, trade networks, and financial institutions. By 1700, the extractive silver economy of the Spanish crown was in structural decline, while the productive economies of Northern Europe were building the financial infrastructure that would define the next 3 centuries of global monetary history. The lesson embedded in the price revolution is one that monetary systems keep learning and forgetting in cycles. Supply is not the same as value. More money in the system does not create more wealth. It distributes existing wealth differently, typically from those with fixed incomes and savings to those who control repricing and asset ownership. The Spanish discovered this with silver ships in the 16th century. The Federal Reserve grappled with the same dynamic when it expanded its balance sheet by trillions of dollars in the years following 2008 and again in 2020. The mechanism is identical. The metal changed to digits on a screen. The structural consequence did not change at all. By the 17th century, European states were beginning to move toward what would eventually become the gold standard, a system in which paper money circulated but was redeemable for gold at a fixed rate. This was an attempt to get the convenience of paper while retaining the discipline of metal scarcity. For roughly 2 centuries, it worked well enough to anchor the global trade system. Britain placed sterling at the center of the gold standard system. The British pound became the dominant reserve currency of the 19th century, the same way Athenian owls had dominated the ancient Mediterranean. Trust, institutional depth, and military reach supporting a monetary claim. Then came the 20th century, 2 world wars, and the structural pressure that finally broke the ancient relationship between metal and money entirely. The scene is documented in declassified White House meeting transcripts preserved in the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond's Historical Archive. On August 13, 1971, 15 men gathered at Camp David for a secret meeting with President Richard Nixon. The participants included Treasury Secretary John Connally, Federal Reserve Chairman Arthur Burns, economist Paul Volcker, and senior White House advisors. The discussion lasted the weekend. On Sunday evening, Nixon made his decision. On Sunday night, August 15th, he went on national television. He told the American people that the United States would immediately suspend the convertibility of the U.S. dollar into gold. In 34 words, 5,000 years of monetary history ended. The Bretton Woods system, established in 1944 as the post-World War II monetary framework, had pegged the U.S. dollar to gold at $35 per ounce. Every other major currency was pegged to the dollar. The entire global monetary system rested on the promise that any foreign government holding dollars could exchange them for gold at the U.S. Treasury at that fixed rate. This was the last structural link between modern paper money and the metal-based monetary tradition that ran from Mesopotamian temples, through Lydian workshops, through Athenian silver mines, through the European gold standard. Nixon cut it. The immediate trigger was straightforward. European governments, particularly France under Charles de Gaulle, had been systematically converting their dollar reserves into gold, correctly perceiving that the United States was printing more dollars than it held gold to back. The Vietnam War and Great Society spending had created structural deficits. The gold window was bleeding. If Nixon did not close it, the U.S. gold reserves would have been depleted entirely within months. What replaced the Bretton Woods system was what the world still operates under today: floating fiat currencies, whose value is determined not by any physical commodity, but by the institutional credibility of the issuing government, market supply, and demand, and the structural dominance of the U.S. dollar in global trade settlement. The dollar today is backed by nothing you can hold in your hand. It is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, which means it is backed by the U.S. tax base, the U.S. military, the U.S. legal system. And the fact that global oil markets have been denominated in dollars since the early 1970s, a political arrangement negotiated with Saudi Arabia in the immediate aftermath of the Bretton Woods collapse that effectively replaced the gold anchor with a petrodollar anchor. This is the system you live inside. Every price you pay, every wage you earn, every debt you carry exists within a monetary architecture built on sovereign credibility and institutional trust, rather than on physical scarcity. And that architecture is now under the most significant structural pressure it has faced since 1971. China and Russia have been systematically expanding trade settled in non-dollar currencies. The BRICS nations have discussed commodity-backed settlement systems that would reduce dollar dependency in international trade. Saudi Arabia signed agreements in 2023 to accept Chinese yuan as payment for oil, a direct challenge to the petrodollar arrangement that has anchored dollar dominance for 50 years. At the same time, Bitcoin entered the world in 2009 with a design that consciously echoes the properties Aristotle identified in Politics Book 1 as requirements for sound money: durability, portability, divisibility, and scarcity. Bitcoin's capped supply of 21 million units mirrors the physical scarcity of gold. Its proof-of-work mining process requires real computational energy expenditure, creating a cost of production that mirrors the cost of extracting metal from the ground. Its creator, whoever Satoshi Nakamoto actually was, understood monetary history well enough to engineer a digital asset that replicated metal as monetary properties without requiring metal. Whether Bitcoin becomes monetary infrastructure or remains a speculative asset class is not settled. What is settled is the question it poses. If the value of money derives from scarcity and institutional trust, what happens when a credibly scarce digital asset competes with institutionally issued fiat currency for that trust? The debate playing out in financial markets and central bank policy meetings right now is a technological restatement of the same debate that played out in Mesopotamian temples 5,000 years ago. What gives money its value? The material it contains, or the authority that stands behind it? Croesus answered this question in a scorched stone workshop in 560 BCE. He said both. The stamp meant nothing without the metal. The metal meant nothing without the stamp. The fusion of physical scarcity and sovereign authority was the engine of monetary trust. Nixon said the stamp alone was enough. The next chapter of monetary history, one you're living through in real time, will determine whether he was right. The room archaeologists found in Sardis was small, functional, and entirely ordinary to look at. A workshop with ceramic vessels and salt-stained walls. But inside that room, someone fused metal and authority into a single portable object and released it into a world that would never again think about value the same way. Every financial system since then has been built on the same two pillars that Croesus understood: scarcity and trust. Remove either one, and the system collapses. Maintain both, and the system becomes the invisible framework through which all human economic life flows. The dollar in your pocket is the latest answer to the oldest economic question civilization ever asked. And for the first time in 5,000 years, a significant portion of the world is not sure it is the right answer anymore. That uncertainty is not new. Every monetary system in history eventually faced it. The Lydian electrum system fell to Persian conquest. The Athenian owl was displaced by Roman denarii. The Roman denarius was debased into worthlessness. The Spanish real was drowned in its own silver surplus. The pound sterling was broken by 2 world wars. The Bretton Woods dollar was closed by a president on a Sunday night. Each system fell not because metal ran out, not because trade collapsed, but because the institutional trust holding the system together fractured under pressure it was not built to absorb. Understanding that sequence from the temple clerks of Sumer to the Oval Office in 1971 does not make you a historian. It makes you financially literate in the deepest sense of the term. Because you cannot understand where money is going if you do not know where money has been. You now know where it has been. The room under the dirt in Sardis was not just an archaeological discovery. It was a mirror. And what it reflects is the world you live in right now.